A community group that's interested in pursuing community-led housing will need to set up an organisation of some kind, and that's quite often when they come to us for some advice. But what we often find is that those groups think that the governing structure is something they need to get in place first before they can do anything else, and that's really not the case. I've spoken to community groups who, the first time that they approach us for some support, they're already getting advice from lawyers on how to set up a limited company or a cooperative or so on and so forth, and that's really putting the cart before the horse. The absolute most important thing to do first of all is to establish a group of people who are interested in the idea. Get talking to local people, local councillors, local organisations, parish council, whoever it might be, to establish, is there interest in the idea first of all? Have people got ideas about where some suitable land might be found, or who might be suitable partners for such an enterprise? For example, is there a housing association that operates in the area already that might be interested in managing community-owned properties? And really just establishing that there is a project there before you even begin to think about whether to set up a charity or a cooperative or a community benefit society or a community interest company, all these various options, all of which are out there and are legitimate options for a community-led housing scheme. But they're really not the first thing that people need to be concentrating on. One of the things that I often say when I'm meeting organisations who are wanting to know what options there are for their governance structure for an organisation is that form follows function. And you can't know what type of an organisation you want to be from a legal point of view until you know what it is that organisation is going to be doing. So for instance, some groups will want to raise funds for a community-led housing project by issuing community shares, so that local people can invest money in the project and perhaps receive a small amount of interest as a reward for taking the risk and investing money in the project. Now that rules out some types of organisations which aren't legally allowed to issue shares and makes choosing another kind of organisation a much more likely option for that particular project. But you can't possibly know which organisation type it's going to be until you've made a decision as to whether community shares, for instance, is something that you're going to do as a project. So my absolute number one piece of advice to organisations to groups thinking of developing community-led housing or exploring community-led housing is really don't worry about the structure. Get the ideas in place, get the passion in place, get the energy in place first of all, and then once you know you've got something viable, that's when you can start worrying about what kind of organisation you should be. So it's important to understand what structures are available, but you don't want to jump straight to choosing one and setting one up. And again, we can advise on what kinds of structures are suitable for a community-led housing project. In fact, I can mention some of them now. Essentially, to be a community-led housing project, you're looking to set up an organisation which is a corporate entity, so it has a legal identity in its own right. So it has to be a company of some kind, but that's a term that can be very broad. So it could be a limited company, just an ordinary company registered at Companies House. That limited company could then also become a registered charity if the aims of the community-led housing projects meet the definition of what's considered charitable. There's a new kind of charity organisation called a charitable incorporated organisation, which has the benefits of being a company without having to be registered both at Companies House and with the Charity Commission, so it reduces some of the paperwork there. And we'd always recommend if people want to be a charity, that's the model that they choose. But it's not necessary to be a charity, to be a community-led housing project. You could be a type of cooperative which is called a community benefit society. And that's a cooperative which is owned by its members but operates not just for the benefit of the members but for the benefit of the whole community. And that can issue shares and take on loans and can operate with a bit more commercial freedom. And similarly, then there's a community interest company, which is a particular type of company registered at Companies House. Can't be a registered charity, as I mentioned earlier, but does specifically operate for the benefit of communities. And then any of those can qualify to be a community land trust, which enables you to access the community land trust network and some of the resources that organisation has. And again, I think there's a point of confusion there. People think that being a community land trust is a specific type of organisation structure, and it's not. It's you can be one of a number of different types of organisation structure, and as long as you're operating housing for the benefit of the wider community, then you can qualify to be a community land trust and access the resources and benefits that go with that. One of the things that a community group should bear in mind if they're embarking on community-led housing is that there isn't a set list of the order in which you have to do things. So yes, it's important to establish some things before others. So as I've said, it's much more important to get the community engaged in the general idea before you start worrying about what kind of organisation structure you have. But there isn't a set checklist of item 1 do this, item 2 do this, item 3 do this. A community group that's setting up in their community, they know their community better than we do or better than any national organisation does. So you will know how to best approach developing interest and ideas within your community works. Where we can help is then putting that into effect. So if it's about setting up workshops in your community or engaging with the local community, consultation events, or getting information out, or questionnaires or surveys, or whatever it is that you choose and you think is the best way to engage with the community, that's how we can help. But the order in which you do those things is not set in stone by any means. So people shouldn't approach community-led housing thinking that they've got to fit into a particular structure or a particular process. You don't. The way in which you do things and the order in which you do things can be flexible according to what your community needs, what you need, what skills you have, what resources you have, what time you have, very much so. So yes, as I say, although there are some things you have to do before some other things, the actual strict order isn't set in stone, and we can be, the process can be quite flexible.